Hi everyone, this is my group, Raina, Maria, Valerie, and me, Lilibeth, and today we'll be presenting a contextualization of Japanese releases. For this, we have selected this woodblock Rebus titled Onagusami Shushingura no Kangai, made by Kyokutei Bakin between 1767 and 1848. So we will be exploring deep into the historical and cultural context of Rebuses using this woodblock as an example. Now, in order for you to understand, let's start with the introduction to Japanese Rebuses. Okay, in Japan, images have long been an important object in linguistic experimentation, where revises were an important element that contributed to the formation of Japanese language. In this sense, Japanese revises transformed and urbanized language by integrating visual elements that end up being a kind of hybridization of verbal and visual expressions through picture puzzles. Thus, more than a linguistic experimentation, we also interpret this as a means to connect society by uniting people's cultural identity with language. So when integrating visual and verbal elements that are correlated to the conception or vision of a society, previous played a role in the development of Japanese language and also as a visual vernacular. In case you're not familiar with this concept, um, here we have, and also, according to Oxford Dictionary, vernacular is the language or dialect spoken by ordinary people in a particular country or region. So these are like common expressions in language that are not formal nor academic that we use in daily life, but can only be understood and by people with the same background or context as people in, for example, Edo epoch had. But even if these visual vernaculars were originated by popular culture, they became so popular that reached all the structures of Japanese society. Now, the region of Rebuses that became famous in early modern Japan date back to at least the 10th century in the form of utai. This term was commonly used to refer to poem pictures and were made by, by poets and artists that employed singular techniques. According to Iwasaki Hitoshi, he defines utae, which means poem picture, as an art which depicts a number of objects which activate indirect association with a play, setting, or poem. So people with the corresponding cultural background can make the correct connection and translate the symbols into a literary passage. So was this artistic practice would engage the popularization of previces and the interdependence of words and images in artistic practices. So this connection between visual and verbal were also important for the development of previces in Japan because it represented an extension of their artistic traditions and the integration of visual and verbal elements in cultural expression. Now, to locate ourselves in a temporal space, it is necessary to go to the Edo period in Japan, the time period where our woodblock was made. And here. And this is relevant since this period was characterized by economic growth, a strict social order, and popular enjoyment of art and culture. Thus, most of the revises depicted cultural or historical elements of the epoch, and it is key to understand to make like a correct interpretation. But It is important to clarify that revises not only were used in literature, as in our woodblock, also as a market strategy to increase customer arrival to stores in Edo, Japan. In this sense, revises exist as visual vernacular, and those are radical way of getting sound on paper via a visual code that speakers can relate to and are decipherable only by this, but those with an advanced level of understanding of Edo dialect. Those that were connected to the social and cultural events that happened in that timeline. Now let's continue with the article overview.
Charlotte Eubanks looks at how visual language, specifically rebuses, were used in early modern Japan, focusing on the artwork of Santo Hyodin, a prominent artist and author of that period. Hyodin employed rebuses in his advertisements to add fun and local flair to otherwise formal messages. In particular, he cleverly combined language and with vulgar imagery, creating a comic tension that connected a sophisticated language with everyday life. This innovative approach served not only as social commentary, but also as a way to avoid the censorship laws of the time, such as the Kansei reforms of the late 18th century. Eubanks argues that rebuses represented a radical terrain for experimenting with the signs and sounds characteristic of everyday speech in early modern Japan, challenging established convention of language and communication. So during the Meiji era, between 1868 and 1912, top down approaches were first implemented to create a national language through a national education system. This language, known as Kokugo, or national language, was based on the dialect spoken in Edo, the Japanese capital of the early modern era, known now as Tokyo. One reason for the imbalance in academic attention is due to material facts. The orthography is well and extensively preserved in written text, while the sounds of the language are more fragile and can only be understood visually through writing. So, while there has been some movement in the last quarter century to explore points to continuity between Edo era and Meiji era Japan, and some scholars have pointed to the role played by early modern era literature in the preformation of modern Japanese. Comparatively, little attention has been paid to the stakes of word picture, playing the formation of what the author described as visual vernacular. So, well, moreover, the article suggests that while Kyoden revisits challenge the linguistic and social norms of the time, other aspects of Edo era culture were also important. For example, it is argued that Bacon text creates a visually complicated world that encourages the reader to decipher its meaning and references. This combination of text and image offers a reading experience that goes beyond the basic narrative, allowing the reader to explore the cultural complexity of the Edo period. So now we're going to talk about the example analysis.
Next, please. Thank you. Well, now I'm going to talk about the example analysis. And first, we have to know that visual vernaculars were made for illiterate people, and they reached these high quality materials that were mainly known by literate people, really intelligent people. We chose this rebus that I will explain later. It is titled Onagusami Chushingura no Kangai, which means a diverting and thought provoking view of the treasury of the loyal retainers. It was in Bacon's book. It was published in 1797, and he was famous in Japan thanks to his yellow covers, which was like a genre of fiction in Edo culture between 1775 and 1806. And this genre of booklets was really, really cheap and accessible to everyone. And it was characterized by this parodic and funny content. And also, it had a social critique through these monochrome line drawings and text. Also, these texts were mainly read by low-ranking samurais and some commoners from the Edo period. And this book also in Travelers. And in this book, the Chushingura story is being told. It talks about the group of the 47 Ronin, which means samurais, that avenged their master that they lost due to suicide. And that is why Baking explains this through this whole rebus, encrypted these some levels in this text, where some of the images are really easy to interpret and to see, and others really need some familiarity or context from the Edo period. Now, let's move into the next presentation and look at the example. So let's remember that we can read it from right to left and from top to bottom. I'm so sorry that it is not that big. So we can notice that there is a small dot, a point, that means a period of an important sentence. In the first line, we have the character naka, that means relationship, friendship, or closeness. It is written upside down. We have also a hand, a book, a squeaky mouse, a courtesan storehouse, some hoops that means unity, and grass. In the line two, we have an elephant, a stick of bamboo, some falling rain, a hand, a monk's supplice, a sail, a whetstone, a moor, a seal in its cloth, and also some seaweed and the kana no, that means possession in Japanese, which means that something is yours. Um, I'll explain them later. In the third line, we have the hoops again, the bridge, another character, motto, which means origin, a butterfly, a moor, a turnip, another kana, a scoop net, a tail, the kanatsu, and a turnip. For the fourth line, we have a bareback, the kanaru, a jewel, a handwriting, again, the kana no, a Go game board, which was a game in Japan. It is still, they can still play today. A door, and the next line, we have a ring on a door handle, another kana, and in this sixth line, we have a bridge horse, a moor, a brush for pasting something, a horse, and a gold bar, and the upper part of the cherry blossom. So, to explain this a little bit, the naka, as I said, it indicates an interlaced word where the reader occupies this playful relationship with the text and this word of whole relations. Those networks could be represented as commerce or trade, such as the bridge, the seal, the gold bars, and others. Also, there's a lot of pleasure and enjoyment, and we can see this through the book, the courtesan, or even the foxtail, which is a pun or a word game. In Japanese, fox is kitsune, and kitsu means come, and ne means sleep. So it could be interpreted as come and sleep with me, which is really a sexual suggestion. And the seaweed represents these sexual relations, and the jewel represents lust. Briefly, this urban culture is characterized by commerce, trade, pleasure, and diversion. The pleasure and the commerce arise from the work day, and we can see this through the fishnet, the hands, and also there's the natural world such as the butterfly, the bamboo, the cherry blossom, and we cannot forget about the spiritual side where we can see the Buddhist soulist, and we can notice that there's a lot of encrypted levels in this text where some of these images, as I said, are easy to interpret and others need really familiarity or context from the Edo period. And also these whole characters has a known sound, and they make a sentence that we can understand the context of the whole Edo period through these rivers. Now let's move it on into the conclusions.
Well, to basically bring this to an end, we talk about many things. We talk about the meaning of rebuses, the origins, also the example that we chose, the rebus that my classmate was explaining, Maria. And I think that to bring this to a conclusion, we basically want to think about the meaning of rebus for us. We know that it was basically this classical word image play, an experimentation between the vernacular sign and sound, this puzzle, right, that people needed to basically try to understand, where it was combining the use of illustrated pictures with individual letters that were representing words or phrases. As also Lilibet was mentioning, Kai Dionen used this friction between the visual signification and the lexical register to generate this remarkable comic meaning, right? Because we were talking about how it was actually taken from this high upper class, where like basically the common people couldn't have access to like the language they were using. So it was a way, it was art, but it was also a way to express things without actually saying it with words, complete sentences. We also heard about the origins, how these rebuses that were so popular in the early modern Japan actually were coming from at least the 10th century, as they were mentioning, from the form of yutai, the literally, poem picture. How these techniques employed by the poets and the artists in the classical court were transformed by basically the origins, because it's the basic or previous form of the rebus, and specifically the Edo rebuses that were the radical way of getting basically the sound on paper via a visual code that belongs only to those speakers and experts of the Edo dialect. We also could observe how the rebuses as a genre had a reorientation away from the hyper literate upper class aristocratic culture and all these aesthetics of elegance, politeness, and all of that went from there to an audience of commoners with a limited range of literacy levels, where they we're giving value more to the vulgar, to the playful, to the playfulness of the meaning of the rebuses, to the comic, to the mercantile. In conclusion, what rebuses meant to do was to take the distance between the upper class complicated language, the pleasing tone of the business solicitation at that time, in the case of the that he was trying to promote his store in a playful way, and make it close, right? Bringing all these niceties of the language down to the street level, down to street language, and basically trying to be very assertive to this novel appeal of the vulgar, turning it just into a shared joke. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.